Hey everybody, I'm Mac Ivey. I'm the chair of the Pre-Med program at the University of Arkansas. And this video is going to be a short version of a presentation I give where I talk about usually med school and medical practice, and then talk about the Pre-Med program that's designed to help you to get into med school. I'm not going to do the first part, but I will do the second part. But the most useful part of those presentations is usually the question and answer session that comes at the end. Since we're not going to have one of those, I'm just going to get right into the questions and try to knock those out at the beginning, sometimes on this slide, and then some I'll give a short answer that I'll elaborate on in the 15 or so slides that I have after this. But let's just get started. What should I major in is by far the most common question at this stage. And the answer is what you like and what you'll do well in, and where you're likely to encounter other students that are like you, that make you feel comfortable. That's the correct answer. The incorrect answer is pre-med, because there is no such major, or some major that someone told you will make you stand out. It's very often the case that people that are trying to recruit you will tell you that, but it's absolutely false. There's no correlation between major and acceptance rates to med schools, and med school admissions committees aren't interested in what you majored in. They're interested in other things, and they want you to do well in your classes, but they're not so concerned about what your degree is. Second question is, do I have to be in honors to apply to med school? Should I be in honors? Does it take time away from other pre-med activities? You don't have to be in honors. About 2/3 of our applicants last year were honor students and the rest weren't. Should you be in honors? Yes, and I'll tell you why. So last year was fairly typical. About 60% of our 150 or so applicants were accepted. That compares to a national rate, which is about 42%, so that's not bad. But among the honor students that applied, over 80% of those were accepted. So it's clear that honors does not take away from your competitiveness. On the contrary, it makes you a more competitive applicant. And there are very concrete reasons why that's true that I'm not going to go into, but we can talk about those later when we meet. What is the pre-med program? That's really what I'm going to be talking about the rest of the time. For now, I'll just tell you that it's not a degree program, as we just said. It's more like a curriculum that is designed to help you prepare for med school and get into med school, and the pre-med program navigates you through that curriculum in ways that I'll talk about in a minute. What classes should I take is a very common logical question. The problem is it's very difficult to answer that because it depends on which of the almost 200 med schools you want to apply to, because they each to an extent have their own prerequisites. There are some generalities that I'll mention as we go through this presentation that we'll talk about. When do most students apply to med school? At the University of Arkansas, between 2/3 and 3/4 of students apply at the end of their junior year. Most of the rest apply at the end of their senior year. A few apply later than that. Nowadays, no one applies before their junior year. How many apply? About 150 a year, typically. This year has been crazy. It was over 200, but it's typically 140, 150. How many get in? Between 60 and 70%, typically. Which med schools do they get accepted by? That answer is always going to be mostly University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, UAMS, and Little Rock. That is our state MD granting school, our only state MD granting school. And it's always the case that state residents will primarily get into their state medical school or schools. So if you're a Texas resident going to the University of Arkansas, your best chances are at the Texas state schools. Likewise, Oklahoma residents into OU, et cetera, et cetera. Among the private, or sometimes called elite schools, that are fairly common here, Vanderbilt and Baylor, I would say, are the most likely that we'll get someone in, year out. But over the last 3 years, we've gotten students into Johns Hopkins, Yale, Duke, WashU, places like that. So we've defined the pre-med program based on what it isn't. So far, I want to talk about what it is in just a minute, but I just want to emphasize that uh, strategically, you don't want to think in terms of what to major in based on that. Make it something you like. If you like biology, that's a good sign, but you don't have to major in it to get into med school. So what is the pre-med advisor? What is the pre-med program? So from my standpoint, as one of the two pre-medical advisors for the university, it's 1,000 students or so. It's actually officially more like 2,000 students, but 1,000 of them are active. From your standpoint, it is those students, but also it is the services that are provided by the university in the form of these two advisors, both of which you will come to know, not so much at first or at the first 2 years, but once the time comes to apply, you will meet with one of us or both of us on a very regular basis. At least I hope you do, because that's the way to succeed. And then I want to mention two resources that after you've heard that, you can kind of start tuning out, because everything that I say is going to be found there one way or the other. The first is the pre-med, the University of Arkansas pre-med website, which is shown here. And this is what it looks like at the moment. It used to be really pretty, but as soon as the pandemic hit, it got to be all business, and I was updating it daily through April. So it still looks pretty much all business, and it will for a while. As far as you're concerned, this tab, pre-med advising, is going to be the important one. And over here, preparation. In 2 years or 3 years, this is where you'll live, the applying to med school information tab. But just be aware of the fact for the moment that there is such a website, because you will need it from time to time. Also be aware that there are student organizations that are pre-med related, and by far the biggest and most general is AED, and the website for it is shown here. So this is a National Honor Society, so it's a little bit weird in terms of being a member of it, but the important thing for you to know now is you don't have to be a member of it to benefit from it, and you can benefit from it basically the day you arrive on campus. So one of the first things that we will want you to do is to get on the listserv for AED, because that allows you to get notifications of events and social outings and workshops that you all want to attend beginning your first year. There are other pre-med associated student organizations that are substantially smaller and more specialized. And whether they're active or not depends on who the president is that year. This year we have two really active presidents for the top two. You don't really need to concern yourself too much with MCAT just yet, so don't worry about that one. But the other two, if they are applicable to you, are very good. And then the last little bit of strategic information that I want you to be aware of is that University of Arkansas does have a pre-med advisory committee. If you don't know what those things are, you will. But for now, just be aware of the fact that the advisory part of that committee description means advising you as a pre-med and also advising med schools in terms of who they should accept. So this advisory committee that we have is a fairly large one, and it's a great committee. It has a practicing physician on it, several MDs and PhDs and professional advisors and so forth. But as far as you're concerned, the important thing is that it was designed to help you with your application when the time comes, and it provides a committee letter that is required by the state school in Arkansas, UAMS. It is recommended pretty much everywhere. So be aware of the fact that we do generate such a letter, and we do help you get in. I mentioned that UAMS is where most of our MD school bound students go. It is the only MD granting school in Arkansas. We have 2 DO granting schools in addition to UAMS in Arkansas. Never mind what DO is. If you don't know it, you will. We'll tell you about that in some other setting. So here's a breakdown of the applicants from the previous year. 137 students actually applied, maybe 150, almost 150 started. Some dropped out of the process as they went through, mostly related to the MCAT score. Here's a breakdown of the majors from last year, and it's a fairly typical year. Biology is always the most. Biochem is always second, and then after that, it's usually the case that exercise science, kinesiology, and biomedical engineering kind of jockey for third place, and then psychology will come after that. And then after that, it'll be a variety of different majors that apply. Over the last 3 years, pretty much every major in arts and sciences has had applicants, and many majors from other colleges of the university do as well. So I mentioned 60% were accepted last year. There's the breakdown and how that compares to the national average. And again, 80.5% of the honors applicants were successful. And this is first year applicants. If we threw in first and second year applicants, it would be even higher than that, because re-applicants have a very high acceptance rate, as it so happens. Okay, so I said I would try to make some generic statements about classes. So here's the problem. There are many different med schools, and they all have slightly different prerequisites and emphases and missions. So you have to be aware of the individual requirements of every school that you apply to. The good news is that UAMS has a fairly standard set of requirements, and they're shown here. So biology, biochemistry, which requires that you take intro chemistry and organic. Genetics is fairly unusual as a requirement, but UAMS requires it specifically. Physics is required by almost every school that has any prerequisites at all. And some sort of writing intensive class or two is very common. Statistics is hit or miss. Humanities or social sciences are very common requirements. So these are the things that you must have before you matriculate, before you actually start med school. And you want to do well in those classes. The average GPA nowadays is hovering around 3.7 nationwide, and it's higher for these elite schools that we talk about, obviously. And then the rest of the academic credentials that you display to med school is in the form of a standardized test called the MCAT. I'm not going to focus on it just now, but I do want to mention that there are a number of prep companies that will try to help you get a better score, Kaplan being one of them. And at the moment, we have an agreement with Kaplan that allows you to purchase their materials and plans for 50% off. And I'm hoping that by the time you apply, we'll have similar agreements with other companies as well. In order to prepare for the MCAT, you will obviously take some of the classes that are prerequisites for med school, but when you take them obviously depends on when you take the MCAT, and that varies from student to student. But we have sort of a list of recommendations based on previous students that we will share with you when the time comes. And then finally, I wanted to mention that there are resources available to you outside of the University of Arkansas that will help you tremendously in terms of the navigation of the pre-med curriculum in the United States. And in particular, there is an organization called AAMC, American Association of Medical Colleges, that basically provides you everything you need to know in terms of what you need to do when and getting into med school. So one example is this really nice timeline that it looks kind of cutesy, but it is actually very detailed when you get into it. And if you follow this, then you'll be in very good shape. But there are similar pieces of information that are contained within the AAMC organization website that are very helpful. So if we take the pre-med requirements, or so-called competencies, at their most basic, which is what I want to do now because I'm trying to go fast, it would be these 4 pillars: good grades, high MCAT score, health professional experience. This is something that you need to establish as a as evidence that you are a good fit for medicine. That is, it's where you should be, that you like it and it likes you. And then volunteering is something that you need to do to prove that you really do want to help people, because you're going to say that at some point in your application process. So among the things that you want to focus on first, good grades and volunteering are the pillars that we stress your first year. You have a little bit of time to pick up health professions experience. It doesn't have to be your first year. And the MCAT score is something that happens as the beginning part of your application process quite a bit later. So this obviously seems like a lot when it goes at you, hits you this fast. But the bottom line is that we're here to help. That's what the pre-med program is for. And it encompasses a number of things that includes academic advising, but we are not the only academic advisors that you'll see. We do the pre-med advising more or less exclusively, and we help you with those pillars and the additional competencies like research and leadership that you'll want to investigate as you go through. But the bottom line is that you have a support system at the University of Arkansas that is there with you from the beginning. And when you need it, we don't get in your way, but if you need help, we will give it to you. That's it.